known as the sweet science, part brain and part brawn. There is perhaps no sport as pure as the sport of boxing. Two combatants, alone in the squared circle, only one emerging victorious. It is the sport that has given us the grace of Ali, the power of Tyson, the elegance of Lewis. Today, we choose the best of the best, the greatest of them all. This is the lineup, boxing's greatest. In today's main event, the greatest fight of all time. To help us choose the greatest fight, we've assembled a who's who panel of some of the most distinguished names in boxing. Acclaimed boxing writer, analyst, and historian, Steve Farhood. Former WBA lightweight champion, Ray Boom Boom Mancini. Academy Award-nominated actor and professional boxer, Mickey Rourke. One of the greatest heavyweight champions in history, the Eastern Assassin, Larry Holmes. All brought together by celebrated broadcaster, Fran Healy. Here now, the first contender for the title of the greatest fight of all time.
Introducing in tonight's main event, our next contender for the title of greatest fight of all time, Marvelous Marvin Hagler versus Thomas the Hitman Hearns. Another battle royale frozen in time is the 1985 matchup between the undisputed middleweight champion, Marvelous Marvin Hagler, and the #1 ranked contender, Thomas the Hitman Hearns. Promoted as The War, leading up to the night in Vegas, indeed the tagline cannot be accused of being mere hyperbole. A title fight that lasted only 3 rounds, but had more action than most 15-rounders. From the opening bell, it was almost entirely a slugfest, with each fighter stunning his opponent. In the third and final round, with blood streaming down his face, Hagler staggered Hearns into the ropes and then followed with a thunderous right to close the show. The electricity, the feverish intensity, the stunning pace of structured violence, a surefire contender for greatest fight of all time, Marvelous Marvin Hagler versus Thomas the Hitman Hearns.
Right now we're going to talk about what I think a lot of people are intrigued with, the greatest fight of all time. And we don't start off with a heavyweight fight. I apologize.
Me too. I'm sorry.
Hearns Hagler.
Well, how many rounds did it go? 4?
3 rounds. 3 rounds. Okay. I was at that fight. I was actually at that fight. I tell people, you always watch the fighter when he enters the ring. Tommy looked like he was beat before he got to the ring.
I'm glad you said that because I was going to tell you why. If you went into his room, it's 100 degrees in there. He's in the heat.
And Emmanuel
because you like to train like that. Man, you get in the gym like that.
Training, I said, man, what the hell is heat in there? Thought that you're going to dehydrate yourself in this room.
Well, Emmanuel Stewart always said the reason he pooped out so quickly in that fight is because he got a leg massage just before the fight.
No, because
Tommy let it all hang out in the first 3 rounds.
He
let it all hang out in the
first 3 rounds. But they had to because Manny told him to.
I got to tell you, he can let it all hang out in the first round. He was whooped before he got in the ring because what managers and trainers, whoever's in the corner, do today in teaching these fighters, they don't know what they're doing. They don't let fighters drink the water. Especially in between the rounds when you're dehydrating. You got to get cooled off in the water. They don't do that. They don't pour water on top of your head to cool you off. They don't tell you to swallow some water. They tell you that's no good because you cramp up. That's not good. And Tommy Hearns is trying to train in all this heat. All this heat. Why? Because he's going to fight in all this heat. You got to be cool. You got to be normal when you go in the ring. Not hot when you go in the ring.
But Mickey's point is important, which is that Hearns let it all hang out, and nobody had ever taken his punch before.
But also...
But a good chin usually beats a big punch.
Hagler did something else for that fight, and he did it very well. He switched up. He went from orthodox to southpaw.
Yeah, but
No,
you
no,
know
Southpaw, the
what?
Orthodox.
Even though he switched all that up, you know, if Tommy Hearns ain't got no energy, you can do that.
But Tommy had energy in the first round.
That's it, but he didn't have nothing left after that, and that's what.
The reason why he went out and let it all hang out in the first round is because when Manny said, well, man, you got no legs, man, then we got to go out and let it all hang out that first round and try to knock him out, because if we don't, we ain't going to last long anyway.
Would you want a guy to be your trainer to tell you, gang, you got to go out there and do it because you ain't got nothing left in the first round? You throw him out of there. You want a guy to tell you you're going to lose the fight? Come on.
When the lineup returns, the next contender for the title of the greatest fight of all time. This is the lineup. Boxing's greatest. Welcome back to the lineup. Boxing's greatest. Here now, the next contender for the title of the greatest fight of all time.
Introducing in tonight's main event, our next contender for the title of the greatest fight of all time, Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier, 1. Known as the fight of the century, these two undefeated warriors met at Madison Square Garden, the mecca of boxing, to prove supremacy in the sport's glamour division. Ali, back in the ring after a 3-year government-imposed exile, facing a bona fide rival in the shorter, hard-punching Frazier. Frazier won the decision, and fight fans were awarded the first installment in the greatest rivalry in all of professional sports, bar none. Contender for greatest fight of all time, Ali versus Frazier, 1. The fight of the century.
Fascinating fight. The fight of the century. Joe Frazier told me in an interview, he said that Ali and I stopped traffic in Manhattan. I remember in the half-hour interview, that's the one thing he said with fondness about him and Muhammad Ali. So, your thoughts on the fight?
To me, the first Ali Frazier is the greatest fight of all time for several reasons. One, the significance. They're both undefeated. Who's the best? I'm the greatest. But also mainly because of the cultural significance. It's probably one of the greatest cultural events, not just sporting events, cultural events in American history. It changed, you know, the money they were making. They both made 2.5, which is, at that time, was unheard of.
And they were underpaid.
And, and that was probably, to me, the only fight that ever lived up to all the hoopla before the fight. And then Joe dropped him that 15th round. You couldn't script it any better than that.
And Joe was busted up pretty good.
Yeah, they both were. And Joe was. Joe actually went to the hospital right afterwards.
Joe was busted up really good. And when I look at a fight like that, it was like almost like Joe imposed his will. Yeah. And he unleashed that left hook. And it was something that came from inside.
Nobody was going to beat him that night.
Exactly, yeah.
You know, Fran, I've covered boxing for a long time, and I've never wanted to be one of those guys who, as he gets older, says, oh, the guys from way back then, they would have beaten everybody. But in terms of anticipation, Ray alluded to it, the anticipation for that fight is like nothing since. And I don't think there'll ever be a sporting event on that level ever again. No. And the fact of the matter is the fight was good. I don't think it was as good as the third fight between Ali and Frazier in Manila, but the fight was very good, and it almost lived up to the hype, if that was possible.
When the lineup returns, the next contender for the title of the greatest fight of all time. This is the lineup, boxing's greatest. Welcome back to the lineup, boxing's greatest. Here now, the next contender for the title of the greatest fight of all time.
Introducing in tonight's main event, our next contender for the title of the greatest fight of all time, Jack Dempsey versus Luis Angel Firpo. The The epic battle between heavyweight champion Jack Dempsey, the Manasseh Mauler, and Louis Angel Firpo, the Wild Bull of the Pampas, is still considered legendary, even though it happened in September of 1923. 80,000 packed like sardines into the polo grounds. What other fight in history had the underdog on the canvas 7 times in the first round, and the defending champion knocked through the ropes and onto the typewriters of reporters at ringside? This was the first time a Latin American fought for the heavyweight crown. Dempsey went on to beat the Bull and cemented his place in boxing history via stoppage in round 2. Contender for greatest fight of all time, Jack Dempsey versus Luis Angel Firpo.
All right, guys, we're going back in time.
Well, Jack Dempsey, Luis Firpo. Firpo was this gigantic heavyweight from Argentina. They called him the Wild Bull of the Pampas.
Okay,
it's coming back to you now, Mickey.
Okay.
And the first round, Dempsey, you know, in those days, there was no 8 count, no mandatory 8 count. You got knocked down, you get back up, the guy could hit you again.
Stand right over you.
So Dempsey knocks Firpo down 7 times in the first round. Wow. The fight's still going, and toward the end of the first round, Firpo knocks Dempsey not only down, but through the ropes. He lands with his head on a typewriter, and the writers are pushing him back in. And then Dempsey, in the second round, finishes the job and knocks Firpo out. But the significance of it is that it was voted the most dramatic sports moment in the first half of the century. Wow. So that's over Babe Ruth, over anybody else. So that was a pretty big fight.
Because Jack Dempsey was, at that time, you know, him and Babe Ruth were the biggest cultural icons in the world.
We've seen the first 3 challengers for the title of the greatest fight of all time. Here now, the next contender.
Introducing in tonight's main event, contender for the title of the greatest fight of all time, Ali versus Frazier 3. The final bout in the trilogy between bitter rivals, Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. It has come to be known as the Thriller in Manila. Fought in 1975 in Quezon City, the Philippines. In the sweltering heat, Joe's trainer, Eddie Futch, stopped the fight going into the 15th round. Ali has said it was the closest to dying he had ever been. Ali and Frazier, forever linked as magnificent rivals in boxing lore. Contender for greatest fight of all time, Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier, the Thriller in Manila.
All right, guys, now we'll talk about, once again, Ali Frazier, and this time it's Ali Frazier 3. Why is it so significant? Every fight they've had was significant.
Well, I'd like to hear Larry's opinion, because the common perception of that fight is that both guys were a little past their best. And that's part of the reason it was as much of an action fight as it was. But the pace for 2 quote-unquote older heavyweights was amazing. And what defines a great fight? Changes of momentum. You have to have changes of momentum.
Was that the fight that got stopped?
Yeah.
Okay.
Eddie Futch stopped it after the 14th. There were so many changes. Ali started fast, and then in the middle rounds, Frazier looked like he was going to knock Ali out, and then Ali magically came back. But, Larry, do you agree that were they both a little past their prime?
They were both. Matter of fact, I was working with Ali and Frazier as a sparring partner. Joe Frazier first here in Philly, then Muhammad Ali over in the Philippines. I was working with them, and I was on the card with a guy by the name of Rondik Babic. And after I fought, I sat right there on the second row, and I watched Ali and Joe Frazier. It was like touch and go. Ali didn't really seem like he had it, because he was doing a lot of unnecessary things while we was over there, okay? But he didn't have, like, he act like he didn't have it. And Joe looked like he was strong, but Joe, at the end, he said he didn't have it either. And earlier than they stopped the fight, he wanted to quit.
But he didn't.
But he didn't.
He didn't.
He
No,
fought.
that's one
He
thing
fought.
about him. Joe came to fight.
It was touch and go. I mean, I had Ali winning by 3 rounds because he's one of my favorites. Anything looked close, Ali got it. You know.
But yeah, Joe was your buddy.
Joe's both of them know my buddy.
Well, you sparred with both of them. Did you have an idea in watching this fight up close who would have the edge?
I knew Ali would have the edge because he had the jab. He was jab. He used that jab. He circled, bang, bang, pow, 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 and then he'd grab you and hold you. And that's the way he did. And Joe Frazier was like short, so he was made for Ali. So I knew that Ali would end up winning the fight. I mean, you know, I was with him, and Ali was in decent shape. Wasn't the best shape he was in, but he was in decent shape.
Let me just say, the Ali Frazier 3, I have no problem being the #1 because it was one of the most violent spectacles in the ring ever for that long. That's what I think it took a lot of people back, that for that long, you know, 14 rounds, it was so violent and it was so busted up. And I think Joe truly, he wanted to hurt Ali bad. And I think Ali, no, he wanted to win the fight. I think his mindset was, you know, more of a survival mode. You've heard the great sayings afterwards, you know, Ali saying it was the closest to death I've ever come to in the ring. And a lot of people know that, you know, Eddie Futch stopped the fight, and Joe didn't want him to, and Eddie Futch stopped, said, no, that's it, I'm not letting him go out. But what a lot of people don't know is that Angelo Dundee almost stopped the fight, because Ali wanted him to. Ali was telling him to stop the fight. Ali said to Angelo, stop the fight. Angelo wouldn't stop it. And Ali was arguing, no, stop the fight, man, I ain't going out there. And before he could do anything to drown, Eddie Futch had already stopped it. If Eddie Futch would have allowed that fight to go on, Ali wasn't gonna go out. Ali
collapsed in the corner.
So he wasn't.
The fight was stopped.
But you agree, Larry? You were there. I didn't know you were there that night. I mean, the violence. It was so violent. One of the most violent fights I've ever seen.
And Ali had the advantage of Joe because Ali got so much charisma. All the people over there, I think with the Philippines, wanted Ali. Yeah, we go Ali, and Joe, you know, nobody care about Joe, you know.
Coming up on the lineup, the final contender for the title of the greatest fight and the judge's decision. This is the lineup, boxing's greatest. Welcome back to the lineup, boxing's greatest. Here now, the next contender for the title of the greatest fight of all time.
Introducing in tonight's main event, contender for the title of the greatest fight of all time, Alexis Arguello versus Aaron Pryor. The explosive thin man against the Hulk. It is remembered as one of the all-time great fights and also one of the most controversial. Behind on points, Arguello stunned Pryor in the 13th round and seemed to be turning it around. That's when fate intervened. The Hulk came out for the 14th round and hit Arguello with a slew of unanswered punches. The referee stepped in and stopped the action. Contender for greatest fight of all time, Alexis Arguello versus Aaron Pryor.
Okay, guys, talk about Pryor and Arguello.
Pryor and Arguello, that was a fight. I mean, those guys, I didn't care who won. I liked Aaron Pryor because he'd come to my place and we hung out together and stuff like that, but that was a fight. I mean, Aaron Pryor looked like he was dead tired, and then all of a sudden, Arguello looked like he was hurt, then all of a sudden he comes back. That was a great fight, man. That's the way I see it.
That fight, you know, everyone, I don't think anybody thought that Aaron Pryor was going to beat Alexis. Anybody. And, you know, prior to that fight, ordinary guys, ordinary fighters were dropping Aaron. Tap him on the chin. He'd get up and knock him out. He'd get up and knock him out. But ordinary guys tap him, go down, he'd get up. So everyone thought, well, Alexis taps that chin and he goes down. He ain't getting up. When if he gets up a first time, he ain't going to get up a second time. That's what made that fight so magnetic. But and Aaron come out there, you know, throwing punches. and Lexus was a sharpshooter.
Alexis had a great style.
Oh, no, great style. But Lexus hit him a shot. I think it was the 6th round. I think if his head wasn't attached to his body, it would have ended up in the 10th row. His head shot, and he came right back. Yeah. That's what made that fight. I think he broke Alexis's will. I think he broke Alexis's will.
I think he imposed his will on him, like which happens when fighters rise to the
We've talked before about how on one night maybe there's just nobody who's going to beat a certain fighter.
I think that happened and took it to another level.
Fran, prior Arguello, I get asked quite a bit because I've been around boxing a long time, the best fight I've ever been at. Yeah. Now, I wasn't at Hagler-Hearns, so I can't compare it to that, nor was I at Castillo-Corrales. But for me, prior Arguello, #1.
It's time now for our judge's decision on the title of the greatest fight of all time.
Okay, guys, we're going to pick what we think is the greatest fight of all time.
Can I be in it?
Absolutely.
All right.
You might as well go first then, Larry.
Kenny Norton is #1 on my list. A great fight, 15 rounds. Check that out. Last 15 rounds.
It's on YouTube.
Kenny Norton, me and Kenny Norton. Yeah, there you go.
You and Kenny Norton, okay.
Me and Kenny Norton, I quit.
I think Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier won. Not only because it was a great fight, but the historical significance, the greatest cultural icon, by far.
I'll go Ali Frazier 3 because of the action and the stakes. But just a quick mention of 2 other fights. Zale Graziano 1 and 2 are the standard for brutal fights, middleweight title fights in the 40s. And also Archie Moore and Yvonne Durrell, their first fight, where Archie Moore was knocked down a bunch of times early in the fight, came back to win. That's always considered one of the greatest. But I still go Ali Frazier 3.
Well, since I'm sitting next to Larry Holmes, I'll have to say Larry Holmes and Kenny Norton.
Yes, I got one.
Larry Holmes, the greatest fight I've ever seen.
Frazier,
the acting
one or three.
The greatest fight I ever saw. This is the greatest fight.
Yeah, write that down.
I swear, was Larry Holmes and Kenny Norton.
You know, it's weird to me that, again, you go back to 2 guys that were older, and you pick that as the fight. And I would probably go with that fight.
You know what's interesting, Fran? If you really think about it, you look at all the great fights. How many times have 2 fighters who are all-time greats, they got to be all-time greats, fought each other in their primes at their best weights? That's happened a lot fewer times than you would guess.
And so, the winner in the category of the greatest fight of all time is Ali Frazier 3, The Thriller in Manila.
This has been the lineup, boxing's greatest.